On a post-holiday episode, we get to jump into what could be the missing pieces for the Carolina Hurricanes. Are we talking top six editions? Maybe a veteran goalie edition? Well, it's time to see what possible targets we'd be looking at for the Carolina Hurricanes as we go into 2025.
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Thursday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everydayer for making this your first listen of the day. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about, Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I am the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hawkeyes. Also the co-host of the Surgecast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. Got a fun show for you guys today on a Thursday episode, as we are still one sleep away from Carolina Hurricanes hockey being back. And I think this would be a perfect time to see, what possible additions the team can make, maybe going into 2025 or maybe starting in January. See if there's possible guys that the Hurricanes could look at to bolster maybe the forward core, maybe look at a veteran netminder and all that good stuff. But before we jump into all of that, you could start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, like I said, I know a lot of people have been bringing up recently of maybe, how do you bolster the roster? Are you looking at a veteran netminder to go alongside Pyotr Kochetkov until Frederik Andersen gets back? Or, figure out if, there's a way to move on from Andersen at that point? Or do you carry three goalies? But I think also, too, what other roster moves you could look at? I can say maybe you're looking at maybe a more of another top six scorer. Are you looking at it as a possible second line center? Are you looking at a winger and stuff like that? And I think that's kind of where, if you want to bolster a roster spot where it's kind of really needed, I think maybe the center position might be the way to go, and especially in the top six. Because if you look at the wingers, I mean, you got Jack Roslovic has been playing pretty well for the Hurricanes. You got Seth Jarvis, Andrei Svechnikov, Martin Necas. And you got Eric Robinson. And even Jackson Blake has shown some promise as well. So if you want to look at, the winger position, I think that those are pretty much really good for the Hurricanes, all things considered. I mean, when you look at the third line, you got Martinook and Carrier. I really don't think you want to mess around with that. So I think there's probably some wingers that you're kind of okay with rolling out right now with the Hurricanes and how they've been playing. But I think right now, the center position might be the way to go. But I do think that maybe if you do add a top six winger, it might be a good possibility as well. So I do have a good number of guys that we could look at as possible candidates to look at in the terms of the forward side. So I got about 5 players that might be some guys to maybe kind of target for the Carolina Hurricanes, going into, maybe early January, going through until maybe the trade deadline. For me, if I'm the Hurricanes, I wouldn't wait until the trade deadline to go for a guy. I would say if you want to help the roster now, it might be a better way to do it early January or somewhere around that area instead of waiting until March. Then you got less than 20 games. Now, there might be some guys there might be more easier to get, some say. I know when it comes to teams that are in contention, like the Winnipeg Jets or, maybe the LA Kings, Edmonton Oilers, I don't know, in division-wise, I don't know if you're getting anything from the Capitals or the Devils. You could see someone in the Atlantic maybe moving some guys as well, but I think there are some guys there maybe might be easier to move more than others. Now, one of the first guys I'm kind of looking at, and I know the Hurricanes said in preseason they were looking at a right shot center. They did pick up Jack Roslovic, but they've played him a lot of wing this season and not really played him in that center position. But I think if you're looking at a guy who's a right shot center, who's, 27, not too old, not too young, in a good spot to where, you could possibly make a trade to get him, and his cap hit doesn't really affect the overall roster too much. He will be a UFA at the end of this current season at the age of 27, and it's San Jose Sharks' Luke Kunin. Now, per the depth chart on Puckpedia, he is considered a third-line center. Now, he is averaging on 5-on-5 a little over 12 minutes, 16 points in 37 games, but he does have 10 goals. He's got a .43 points per game. He was drafted in the 15th overall in 2016 by the Minnesota Wild. Now his Corsi for percentage is 40.7, meaning that the team, when you look at that, it's like, puck possession and stuff like that. It's a little bit on the lower side, and goals for percentage is 41.9. But you are talking about a San Jose Sharks team is at the bottom of the league. And the Hurricanes know him pretty well because he did score 2 goals the last time these two teams met up. But I think overall Kunin wouldn't be a bad option if you're looking at hey, let's take a flyer on a center that is a right shot who, isn't too old and someone that's possibly to take a look at. Now, in terms of his points, the most he's had was 31 back in 2019-20 with the Minnesota Wild, where he had 31, 15 goals, 16 assists. Now, he did have a stop in Nashville where he had 22 points back in 21-22, and those were 13. With the Sharks, as this is his big season, he had 11 goals and 18 points last season in 77 games. Right now, he's already 1 goal, 1 assist, and 1 point away from already tying all of those with the Sharks, and that's in 37 games. So I think he's having the upside to his year. Not a big guy who could be like someone that's going to, jump off the page, but I think right now as someone who is an alternate captain for the Sharks, it'd be interesting to see what the Sharks could want for a guy like him. But I think Luke Kunin wouldn't be a bad option if you're looking at a right shot center who's someone you could kind of take a shot on. Like, hey, your third line center for the Sharks, you're putting up some pretty decent numbers. Maybe that's an option where you can go and be like, hey, let's throw this guy at second line center, see what he can do. He's right shot. Maybe there's something here that we could be looking at. I wouldn't say he's probably the biggest ticket item as a guy to go get, or maybe someone that you're kind of like, ooh, he jumps off the page at you. But I think he just has that sneaky ability to where if you're put on a proper roster, because you're talking about a guy who was on Minnesota Wild when they're playing okay, Nashville wasn't really getting used a lot. Now he's with the Sharks and having a pretty decent season overall. I think that would be a bad guy to get if you're looking at someone at 27. You can kind of throw into your second line center. Maybe see if he works out with a roster constructed under Rod Brind'Amour. So that is an option. Now, another guy I'm looking at, and I actually mentioned him in an article over at the Hockey Writers, and it's someone who could, I think, play really well. Now, it would be the Chicago Blackhawks, and, the Hurricanes have had a good rapport of, working with the Hawks and getting players. So he is listed as a center, but he's been on the depth chart, second or right wing for the Hawks, and that's Ryan Donato, the former 56 overall pick back in 2014 by the Boston Bruins. This season, he does have 11 goals, 20 points in 33 games. He's a .61 point per game guy. Goals for percentage is actually higher than Kunin's at 51.7. His Corsi for is 47.2. Now, so far this season, like I said, 11 goals, 20 points. Last year with the Hawks in 78 games, he had 12 goals, 30 points. So he is on his way to probably have another good season, probably better than it was last year for them. Did have a stop with the Kraken where he had 31 points in 74 games back in 21-22, and that's basically his best season overall. Now, assist-wise, it was last year with that 18. I think if you're looking at another guy who's playing really well on an underperforming team, I think that's Ryan Donato of the Hawks. I like his game. A great guy who does have some good scoring touch, someone that you could put on your power play 2 unit. Another guy that you could easily slide into the second line center position. Well, because the Hawks have him right wing too, but if you put him center on that second line, I think that with his ability, he is a left shot. He's not that right shot center that the Hurricanes are looking for, but I think the fact that Donato can play center in wings, that would be a bad versatility option for the Hurricanes, especially for his two-way game. But I think he's another one of those guys that could really possibly fit into the second line spot, someone who could work really well at $2 million compared to Luke Kunin's 2.75. So when you're looking at a guy who's going to be UFA this year, Donato, just like Kunin, that's not bad for the fact that you're looking at less than $3 million. Of course, Donato's at 2. So with the cap for the Hurricanes being at 1.574, getting his 2 wouldn't be hard to add into the roster, especially if you're looking for a top 6 option for that team, because you can easily move a contract that's under $1 million just to get to that $2 million range, or even get a guy who's kind of somewhat near that in terms of contract value. So I think either getting Kunin or Donato wouldn't be bad options for the Carolina Hurricanes. But we do have 3 more that I want to go over. And then we're going to be creeping up into a little bit more of a cap range, maybe some guys who might be a little bit possibly harder to get out. I still want to think it wouldn't be hard to work on if possible. So stick around as I will go over the other 3 possible top 6 additions for the Carolina Hurricanes here in a second on a Thursday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season. That means you're bringing people together at live events. The experience is that much better, and it's the perfect gift. And Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to live events even easier. And it's a curation that makes it easier to save more on not just sports, but also concerts, comedies, theater, and so much more. I mean, if you look at certain concerts of, AC/DC's coming to Chicago in May, or even you got Metallica coming to Charlotte at the end of May as well. They can help you with concerts, like I said, also comedies. Maybe even go to a Broadway play. There's so much that Game Time can help you out with. Now, if you toggle the all-in pricing feature, it will show you your total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Now, my favorite aspect of the app is their seat viewfinder, because you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. So you don't got to worry about obstructive views, awkward angles, or anything like that. Because let's be honest, you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, and you can do that with Game Time. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNAHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKDOWNAHL. That's LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Well, it's Game Time. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. Now, I know back in segment 1, we kind of talked about Luke Kunin from the Sharks, also Ryan Donato from the Blackhawks, 2.7, 0.5, $2 million. 2 guys who are listed as centers, with Kunin playing third line center. Ryan Donato is right now currently right wing, second line for the Hawks. Here's another guy who's kind of farther down in terms of the Montreal Canadiens roster. He is listed as the fourth line center. He has a right shot. He will be UFA after this season, like Kunin and Donato. He will be at 29. So you're going from 27 with Kunin, 29 with Donato, and then this guy's also going to be 29 as well, and that's Jake Evans. Now, this season, he's got 8 goals and 21 points in 34 games. He's a .62 points per game while being on the fourth line center depth position for the Montreal Canadiens. Now, his contract is $1.7 million. He is a former 207th overall pick back in 2014 by the Canadiens. Goals for percentage is 4.7, and his Corsi for is 47.3. Now, like I said, this season right now, he does have 8 goals, 21 points. He's only about 5 off from his career high in goals, which he set back in 21-22, which he had 13. He's already well within getting close to it. His best assist season was actually in 23-24 at 21, already at 13, so he's on pace to beating that. And in terms of points, his best career year points-wise was 29 back in that 21-22 season. He's only 8 away from that already. So you're looking at a career season already for Jake Evans. And like I said, that's playing fourth line. That's being slotted as the fourth line center for the Canadiens. He's actually averaging 11.84 even strength on ice. And that's compared to 12.75 for Donato, 12.05 for Kunin. But I think for the fact that Jake Evans is putting up the production that he is while playing on that fourth line, which I think if you put him on any other roster, it doesn't have like Suzuki and all the other guys that got on that roster right now for the Canadiens. I think if you give him the opportunity to slide into a top 6 spot, especially with the Hurricanes and the guys they have around. Like, say, if you put him with Robinson and Nietzsche on that second line, I think Evans could be that guy that could potentially give a shot to the Hurricanes of, hey, here's a guy who's putting up the points in these type of games, and he's doing it with under 12 minutes of even strength ice time. And yes, while he's 28, his 1.7 for his contract going into a UFA year this summer, that's not a bad contract to get, because you're talking less than Kunin's, even less than Donato's that you could easily fit into this roster, where the cap space is only 1.57. At a 1.7 for Evans, that's not bad for a 28-year-old right-handed shot center. 6 foot, 185, and I think that you could possibly fit that contract into where it's not going to be too much of a cost if the Canadians are a team that can be willing to trade with the Hurricanes, especially for the fact that the Canadians once again are struggling this year, not really playing to what they thought they were going to be. So I think adding a guy like Evans could possibly work for the Hurricanes in terms of probably not having to give up a whole lot if they're willing to make that move, and it's not going to cost a whole lot to make that cap work in the space. Because even if you go and trade someone, maybe from the main roster, or maybe someone from Chicago that you want to throw to the Canadians as a prospect, even a draft pick as well. Of course, I'm not going to make trades today, but they're like, whoa, this could work for this type of trade. I'm just seeing it as a target player. Evans could be one that you're like, okay, he's not making it's like his cap hit works. He'll fit with the team depending on what move they make. If it's main roster, someone down in the AHL, you can easily make this contract work in your favor. Like I said, another right shot center that they're looking for, someone who is putting in production on fourth line minutes, to where if you throw them into the top 6, it could possibly work for the Hurricanes. I know it's not a flashy splash name, but I think if you're looking for someone who can add some depth, but you could also move up and down the roster, I think Evans could be that guy, for the fact that, like I said, his production in terms of where he's at for the Canadians, you're talking about someone who's not really played a whole lot of minutes overall. I mean, you're talking time on ice, 904, over 900 minutes in 21-22 and 72 games. 22-23 only played in 54, but then last season, 23-24, just a little over 1,000 minutes played overall. So you're talking about a guy who's, maybe not gotten the opportunities necessary that you would think for someone who got drafted 7th round by the Canadians. Like, he's been given the opportunities necessary to make it work for him, but I think he's not been given the proper opportunity from the Canadians. I think if you give him that shot in Carolina, where there's that right shot center you're looking for, I think that could be a good possibility for the Hurricanes. Now, this is where it's going to get very interesting in terms of how are you going to make these contracts work, and are these teams willing to give these guys up? Now, the one that I think would be really great for the Hurricanes, this is more of a winger position, and it is Nikolai Ehlers from the Winnipeg Jets. Now, he's going to be 29 at the end of the season. He's got 27 points in 27 games. It's in 10 of those being goals. He was 9th overall selection by the Jets in 2014. Even strength time on ice, 11.88. Goals for, 57.7. Corsi is 47.6. Now, he is making $6 million by the Jets, and they are a contending team, so I'm not sure if they are willing to give him up, despite the fact that, last year he did have 25 goals and 61 points in 82 games. That's his overall points-wise his best season. It was his best. That wasn't even his best assist season, where he had 36. He actually had 39 back in 2016-17, and even goals. His best season goal-wise was in 17-18, where he had 29. So while he might not be hitting career highs in a lot of these categories, he still is a winger who's still points per game at 28. In the last year of his 7-year contract with the Jets, course at $6 million. This is where, do the Jets want to give Nikolai Ehlers up, even though they are a contending team who's really putting in the work on the Central Division, while he is going into a walk year as well, going into free agency at 29. This one might be a little bit more of the unlikely side, but I still think if the Hurricanes are able to pull a trade off to where, you're trying to pull a point per game winger off of a contender right now, and we're not talking just playoffs, but maybe possible Stanley Cup just with how the season started for the Jets. This one might be a little bit harder to move, but like I said, if the package is right and the Jets are willing to give up Ehlers, the Hurricanes could make this work. It's just you have to find a way to make that $6 million work into your cap space. Now, could this be a Jesperi Kotkaniemi going back to the Jets for that and possible draft picks and maybe a prospect as a sweetener to move that 4.82 to get that 6 and then do some other cap maneuvering? It's a possibility. If that's the case, it's just, will the Jets be willing to make that move, and are the Hurricanes willing to take on that $6 million? And now this is where I wouldn't want this to be a trade deadline move. This would have to be like a January, February move to get him a little bit more acclimated. Now, could they extend him past the season? Possibly, but I'm not really sure, though. Like I said, this is more of a it might not happen, but there is a slight chance. And could they make the move? Yeah. It's just, what are you willing to give up here for the Carolina Hurricanes and for the Jets? Are you willing to move on from this guy? Because he was connected last summer with the Hurricanes in a possible trade, which at the time did include Martin Necas, but now you kept Martin Necas. But do you go and get a guy like Ehlers that, while he is currently listed on the depth chart as right wing 2 for the Jets, he is actually a left shot left winger. So are you looking at maybe Ehlers, whoever your center is, maybe Jack Drury when he's back, or whoever you slot in that position, and then Martin Necas? Ehlers and Necas on the same line might be a good possibility. It could look really good. It's just, like I said, are the Hurricanes willing to make that move, and are the Jets willing to give up a guy like Ehlers in a contending season for the Jets? So that's more of a long shot, in my opinion. Hey, it's never a bad idea to go actually look for a guy who could really put an extra spark onto the Carolina Hurricanes, especially for someone in 27 games only has 4 penalty minutes. Now, another guy, and this is the last one in terms of the forwards, looking at the top 6, and he's in his last year as well, making $5 million for his cap hit. Another former 9th overall selection, but of course this one came in 2010 with the Minnesota Wild, and that's Mikael Granlund. Now, he will be UFA at the age of 33 at the end of the season. 11 goals, 33 points in 35 games for the San Jose Sharks. So you're looking at a higher upside guy for the Sharks than not in Kunin, but with Granlund, 13.84 minutes of even strength, 47.6 in goals for, 44.10 in the Corsi for percentage. Now, Granlund has been looked at by a lot of teams, another alternate captain. The Sharks are in another struggling year. He's already about ready to tie last year's goal total, which was 12, but his best did come when he was with the Minnesota Wild at 26 goals back in 16-17. Points-wise, his best season was 64 back when he was with the it was 69 back in that same season with the Minnesota Wild in 16-17. So right now, he could be on pace to have a really good season with the Sharks. He might beat last year's possible point total. I'm not sure about assists. He is about 26 away there, but he is about ready to beat his goal total with the Sharks. Now, he is a left shot center, but he's currently on the depth chart left wing 1. Another guy who could probably play wing and center, but I think if you're going to throw in Granlund, it wouldn't be a bad option to throw him as the second line center, given the fact that you have Svechnikov, Aho, Jarvis, Svechnikov, Jarvis, Necas, maybe Jackson Blake as well. You got Eric Robinson. I think if you want to throw Granlund as a center, that wouldn't be a bad option for the Carolina Hurricanes. If you throw him on possible wing as well, that wouldn't be an overall bad thing. But it's just, are the Sharks willing to give up an assistant captain, an alternate captain going into a walk season for his UFA at the end of the summer? And while his cap hit is, $5 million compared to Nikolai Ehlers' 6, he want to be a bad option as well on a struggling Sharks team. So where it's not you're trading for a contender to get their guy, you're looking at trading with the Sharks who are kind of lower in the league, and the Sharks are willing to make trades because you saw them go and get, Georgiev to throw in net. went and got, Barkley Goodrow and, all these Tyler Toffoli and all these guys. So you're looking at a team who's willing to try to make moves to help bolster their team now and in the future. Now, try and get rid of $6 million try to give the $5 million for Granlund. Is there another big contract coming back from the Hurricanes? Are the Sharks willing to eat some of it too? Who really knows? But I think that's another good possible option to look at for a guy who could probably play wing. You could throw him at center since he's kind of listed as one, according to Puckpedia. So it's a good chance. Now, if they throw more of a winger position, okay, then it is what it is. But I still think it's another good boost to the top six. You're looking for a guy, like I said, who's got, overall 33 points in 35 games. So you're talking about a 0.94 point per game guy. It's just like I said, could the Hurricanes be willing to make that move, and then the Sharks willing to trade him away, even though they are going to be a team that's going to miss the playoffs, and are they going to eat some of the contract as well, unless the Hurricanes trade them a contract that's not exactly at 5, but maybe close to 5 for an offsetting move to maybe give someone for the future for them. So who really knows? But those are kind of like the forwards that I'm kind of looking at right now to go after. Maybe you're looking at Luke Kunin, Ryan Donato, Jake Evans, Nikolai Ehlers, and maybe Mikael Granlund. So let me know in the comments, how do you feel about those possibly being the guys that the Hurricanes could potentially look at in terms of the forwards? I know some of them aren't really the super high-end big names. You're kind of like, really gets, maybe moves the needle super high. But I still think it's something to where you're possibly adding to the top six that could help as a possible wing option or maybe a possible second-line center option. Like I said, I don't know if you're going to see a huge splash from the Canes this season in terms of a trade, but I think more so Granlund or Ehlers could be more closer to the splash side of things rather than go for, hey, let's give this guy, a proper shot on a team that's contending and maybe someone that could really help this team out in Donato or Evans or maybe even Kunin. So who's to say, but I think those are some possibly good options. But let me know in the comments, like I said, how do you feel about those forwards that I have mentioned so far this episode? So speaking of the forwards, we're done with that. Now we're going to look at possible veteran goalie additions that maybe the Hurricanes are going to look at to help alongside Pyotr Kochetkov. So stick around as I go over those guys here in a second on a Thursday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score, and so much more. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official special sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to a segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. So we're here in the first 2 segments of possibly forwards that you could look at to help bolster the top 6. Now we're looking at possible goaltenders to help the Hurricanes in terms of having them alongside Pyotr Kochetkov, because while Spencer Martin in his own merits did really well, even Dustin Tokarski's done pretty good for the Hurricanes as well. I know a lot of people are still clamoring for a proper veteran to go with Pyotr Kochetkov, so that way he's not having to bolster so much of the workload, which I think he's been doing pretty fine this year, all things considered. But for the sake of argument, if the Hurricanes go and try to trade for a veteran netminder, who is the guy to possibly be that guy for the Hurricanes in terms of a trade? Now, this first one, I don't know how much of a possibility this could be for the fact that the Kings are in a playoff spot. He's considered their #1 goalie for them right now, but going to a UFA season this summer where he's going to be 32, he's only making $1 million, and that is David Rich of the Los Angeles Kings. Now, in 19 games, he's got a 2.46 goals against average. While his save percentage is .891, it's another one of those things where he's in the Pyotr Kochetkov territory of he's not giving up a lot of goals per game. Like I said, they're both within 2.46 and 2.43. while their save percentages are probably in the lower nines, upper eights. But overall, I mean, David Rittich so far is playing pretty solid for the LA Kings. This is coming off season last year where he only played in 24 games for them, but he had a 2.15 goals against and a .921 save percentage. Now, the last season he played a proper bulk of minutes was with the Calgary Flames, where he had a 297 goals against and a 907 save percentage. And then the season before that in 18-19, 45 games where he had a 261 and a 911. So in terms of his numbers with Pyotr Kochetkov, they're pretty much similar in terms of, while the goals against are pretty low for the most part, the save percentage is kind of around that lower 9 range, like lower 910s, upper 900s in terms of that aspect. So, and that's, going back to the Flames, but even like I said, with the Kings, 215 last year, the 921, this season 246 and an 891. So I know, like I said, it's not a super huge name you can think of, but I think David Rittich, in terms of $1 million on a cap hit, it's just, are the Kings willing to make that move? I'm not sure, since he's technically their number one goalie. They aren't currently in a playoff spot, but I think if you're able to swing a move with Rob Blake to say, hey, we want Rittich, we think he could be a next step for us in terms of goaltending, what are you willing to give up for him? Or where you willing to get for us to take him away? Who knows? But I mean, for $1 million, that's really not bad, because you're looking at $2 million for Pyotr Kochetkov. Even with Frederik Andersen coming back in late February, early March, even with his contract coming back, you're still looking at a possibility of where it could work with having, if you have to run 3 goalies, Rittich wouldn't be a bad option, only at $1 million. It's just, are the Kings willing to give him up? And that's kind of where it's kind of maybe. Who really knows? But that still wouldn't be very bad if you're looking at a guy like Rittich to come in, at 32 years old, will be UFA at the end of the season. But his cap is not bad at all. And even with his stats, they're pretty much almost similar to Pyotr Kochetkov's, but someone who can play a pretty good tandem as with him. Now, another guy I know a lot of people are excited for, they would probably want to go get, and that's Kirill Velizhmelka, who is, right now in tandem with Connor Ingram of the Utah Hockey Club. Now, he will be 29 at the end of the season, so a little bit younger than Rittich, who's going to be 32. Velizhmelka is a former 145th overall pick back in 2015 with the Nashville Predators. Now, this season with Utah, he's a 2.33 goals against and a 9.17 save percentage. Now, overall, in his career, he's been someone who's kind of been is like 335, 343, and that was back when the team was in Arizona. Of course, this is a very struggling Arizona Coyotes team, where his save percentage was 897, 900, 898. This year, in 20 games, like I said, 233 and a 917. That's really good for the fact that being in a 1B situation with, Connor Ingram here in Utah. I'm interested to see if Utah would be willing to move on from Velizhmelka, since the fact that he's currently in their tandem, like I said, with Ingram. I'm not really sure if that's a good possibility that it might work, but at 2.725, not a bad cap hit overall if the Hurricanes go trade for him. It's just, is Utah willing to give up a guy who's got a really good, in terms of his stats of a 233 and a 917. Those are currently right now his best numbers in terms of those two stats in his career so far. We're talking in his 4th season in the NHL. Of course, that's with the Arizona, now the Utah Hockey Club. Not a bad guy to get. He is, like I said, a little bit younger than David Rittich, with his cap hit being a little bit higher, but someone who's got some pretty good numbers, who's been in the league, like I said, only in his 4th season, but a veteran who's not really a lot older, someone who's closer to Pyotr Kochetkov's age range, and has already shown that he could play in the tandem with another guy in Ingram. So Velizhmelka and Kochetkov wouldn't be a bad 1-2 combination for the Hurricanes if they're willing to go make that move, and if Utah's willing to move on from a 1B goalie in their system right now, because right now they're not really in a contention for a playoff spot. They're playing some okay hockey, but is that something that they're willing to move on from? But definitely a target that the Hurricanes could go after, which wouldn't be too bad at all. Now, this guy, I have mentioned him in an article for the Hockey Writers, And as of recently, the Hurricanes have been known to rumor to talk to him as a possible reunion piece. He will be 32 at the end of this season, and he's in the last year of his deal with the Ottawa Senators at $2.75 million. And that's Anton Forsberg. Now, in 11 games played this year, he's got a 295 goals against and an 889 save percentage. While his goals is a little bit higher than a lot of these other guys, and the save percentage is in the, closer to the 890 range rather than the 900. Now you're talking about a Senators team who has been hot as of late, but of course with Linus Ullmark, he's going to get the bulk of the starts. Forsberg might get some starts here and there. But like I said, he's been someone who's already potentially, like I said, has already been linked to the Hurricanes as a possible option because I guess Carolina has asked about him. I was on him back in November as well, and as someone that could be, hey, he's in the last year of his deal, not super old. Like I said, he's going to be going into a UFA this summer at 32. So, like I said, a little bit higher, than Vejmelka, but right around the Dave Rittich range. He's already been with the Hurricanes once. Wouldn't be a bad reunion option if the Hurricanes want to go that way. And like I said, his contract isn't too bad at 2.75. It is a walk year. Even with Anderson's contract coming off the Bucks, maybe that's someone that the Hurricanes want to possibly extend at the end of the year. And that could be the same thing for Vejmelka too, because these are going to be 29. So those are probably two possible options. Like, hey, we'll bring you in a trade. We might want to extend you this offseason and see, keep you with, Kochetkov. You guys are kind of, close enough-ish in the age range of where it could work together as a possible tandem, because I think while Forsberg is considered a number 2 goalie to Ullmark, I think he would be a pretty solid 1B option to Kochetkov's 1A, because I still think Kochetkov is the goalie of the now and the future for the Hurricanes. But if you give him a proper 1B option that's not really injury prone, and like I said, in Vejmelka and Forsberg, I think one of those two guys could be a solid option as a veteran-ish goalie to add on to what Kochetkov could do. While the Senators are in a push for a playoff spot, they do have some younger guys in the pipeline they might want to look at as well to maybe back up Ullmark, because Ullmark is essentially the number 1. I don't think it would be too much of an ask to be like, hey, what can we do to get Forsberg, bring his contract in, and see where we go from there. So those are, I think, 3 possible goalie options in terms of some of the teams are contenders right now for playoff spots, or who maybe might be willing to give up on their guy who's a possible 1, possibly like a possible 1, possible 1B in terms of that type of situation, to go to the Hurricanes and make it work. Or even a guy like Vejmelka who's on a Utah team that maybe he's a fringe, but is willing to go and give him up for his cap space not being super bad, but something that could work as a 29-year-old goaltender work with Kochetkov. So just like the Fords, let me know in the comments how you feel about possibly Rittich, Vejmelka, or Forsberg to come in as be like that 1B type goalie to Kochetkov. Or do you think there's someone else that the Hurricanes can go for that might be available? So I know it's a lot of guys I threw out to you guys for this episode, but I think it's a good thing to kind of start looking at, what's that next possible piece the Hurricanes could go for in terms of like maybe a top 6 edition, or maybe a veteran goaltender that's not going to eat up a lot of bank in terms of cap space, but someone who could be reliable, that's going to be there every game when needed to be called upon to be that 1B option to Pyotr Kochetkov. So like I said, let me know in the comments, how do you feel about the Fords that I talked about, and also possible goalies that might be a good option for the Hurricanes as well in a possible trade. Hopefully maybe January. I don't want to wait until March. Hopefully we get something a little bit sooner. That could be a longer project of window to look at before we go into the 2025 playoffs in April. But guys, that will wrap up the Thursday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Thank you for making Locked On Hurricanes your first listen today. For your second lesson, check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you're going to keep up with me, I'm at OneTrueZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky at the Zachary Martin. I do have link trees in both of my bios to where you could check out my articles at the Hockey Writers, or just go to the hockeywriters.com and search for my author page at Zach Martin. You can find my articles over there. If you want to check out my other podcasts, just go to the search cast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. For this show, Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you listen, Locked On Hurricanes, follow, subscribe, leave a 5-star rating and review, because if you do, I might just read it on the show. Also for YouTube, subscribe, hit the bell notification to make sure you don't miss an episode. Leave a thumbs up button to let me know if you like the episode as well. Share it with all other Caniacs so they become everydayers just like you. But I hope everyone enjoyed this Thursday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. I hope everyone had a great holiday. I hope they got some really great gifts. And I hope you guys have a great Thursday. And, we're only one more day away from Canes hockey to be back. But until next time, as always, let's go Canes.